Or you're not talking about the earthquake?
I am talking, yeah, about the earthquake. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we felt it pretty badly. It was a strong one. It lasted for 2 minutes.
Yeah, I heard.
Yeah, yeah.
That must be so scary. I never experienced an earthquake in my life. I mean, like, yes, like once I was like, that was maybe something, but like never where it was decisively super threshold.
No.
And it looks like we have Eva too now, no? Yes. Hey, Eva, good to see you.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, perfect.
Cool.
And by the way, the background is like super great that you have there. I love that.
Oh, thanks. I'm finally actually attending to my plants now because I'm home all the time, so they're not dying. It's good.
We are live, guys. We are
We
live.
have one more speaker here.
Okay, great. So we start our live transmission talking about plants. Plants are great. I've really gotten into it since the pandemic started. The one thing that I couldn't, and sorry for everyone who's already tuned in, we're just talking a little bit to pass a little bit of time because it takes a while until the very extremes are live. So what I found shocking is in March, the lab shut down. No one was there until September. And some of the plants survived this. I couldn't believe it when
I came back 4 months later and my snake plant was still, was still kicking. So
exactly, it's the snake plants that survived it. Whereas this cactuses, you'd be like a cactus, not like that lives in the desert. It's as dry as it gets. The cactuses were all dead. But the snake plants, they okay, maybe we should, well, let's give it another minute or so.
We have 16 attendees eagerly waiting for the discussion, I see already, which is great. Welcome, everyone.
Great. Fantastic. And still slowly joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for being here. And maybe let's first introduce my co-host here. So it's this has been organized and will be emceed jointly by Jutta Perazzi, who's one of the leading dendrite scientists.
Hi.
And my name is Conrad Carding. So we will start the session by going around and having short introductions. In those introductions, we will ask all of the panelists to very briefly say 3 sentences, introduce themselves, who they are, maybe a sentence on the research they do, and maybe a sentence or 2 on which things in this space of climate they are ready to talk about. But maybe one thing that I forgot and should have said is, why are we here? Why are we talking about it? So, and in a way, this is something that I personally didn't always know why we would be here. Namely, I hadn't realized, and shame on me, that the way the field works and the way the field communicates and the way the field and power structures are built is making a lot of people in our field not included. They make them not feel welcome. And when I realized that, it started to be a real issue for me. And that's why I'm so excited to be co-organizing this. So now, what do we try to achieve? We want to give this a stage. We want to have a place where people discuss about these issues, where people discuss about the things that make them feel included or not included, a space where people can get together and talk about it. And we believe that by giving it a stage, by just being here, talking about it, that is the first step to making the field more inclusive. So why don't we start briefly, just like with these short introductions, who you are and what you can talk about, and why don't we start with Jutta?
Okay, thank you, Conrad. My name is Jutta Perazzi, and I am a computational neuroscientist and a wannabe experimental neuroscientist. I was actually trained as a mathematician and wanted to be a doctor, so it's a little bit complicated, never mind. I lead the dendrites lab at IMBB Fort in Crete, in Greece. I'm a wife, a mother of 3 kids, 3 cats, and 2 dogs. So big family. I can talk about that as well. I can also speak about the issues related to being in a minority, as I am one of the 3 out of 100 women in my institute that sits at the full professor position. Yes. So I can talk about bullying, about aggressiveness, about gender bias in the field in general, and also in the scientific community. And importantly, about the stresses related with having a career in neuroscience. Thank you. Next one.
Yeah, why don't we go with Tim next?
Hi, my name is Tim Versteinen. I am a associate professor at Carnegie Mellon University in psychology and neuroscience. I also run the CMU Pitt Bridge Center, which is a neuroimaging center here. I study the neural basis of decision-making and learning, focusing on cortical basal ganglia interactions. And what I can talk about here is the perspective of someone with immense amount of privilege trying to figure out how to make spaces for others, and what it's like to try to figure out your blind spots, and being comfortable with being called out and learning to kind of listen to others in order to learn, make space for other voices, and more importantly, share the effort. So I can talk about the learning experiences of somebody trying to kind of come to terms with their privilege and how to use it effectively for change.
Great. So why don't we hear from Eva next?
Hi, my name is Eva Dyer, and I'm an assistant professor at Georgia Tech in biomedical engineering, and I work in computational neuroscience and machine learning. So I have kind of recently come into, spaces where, like talking about these sorts of issues is, okay, what I'm trying to say is this is new for me and I want to share my story. But yeah, I mean, I think the things that I can talk about are being in a male dominated field and, feeling aggression or feeling other sort of issues of toxic masculinity that are just kind of latent and sort of all encompassing in many cases. And I can talk about being a queer woman and issues that I faced around that, talking about being an interdisciplinary scientist that sort of feels like you're kind of moving between different fields constantly and maybe don't feel like you have a natural home or one safe space. And so just, how that feels to kind of move between these different fields and disciplines as well.
Great. So it would be great to hear from Charlene next.
Hello, I'm a professor currently at the University of Alabama. I recently moved from Indiana University. At Indiana, I was a full professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences. I ran our imaging research facility for 5 years, and I was the director of our program in neuroscience before I left. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist whose primary tool is MRI. But like Eva, so my education is in engineering, so I have a PhD in biomedical engineering, and I can also sort of discuss that switch from moving from an engineering program to a psychology department, which was a bit shocking. Right now, I'm at the University of Alabama, like I mentioned, where I am in some ways creating an institute, a research institute, so the Alabama Life Research Institute. Which will encompass neuroscience. We'll be creating neuroscience programming here. I can talk about being a woman, being a Black woman, the differences in being a Black woman and being a woman. So looking at that intersectionality piece. I'm also a mother and a single mother at that. So talking about raising, my daughter is now 23, so I can talk about raising a child while on the tenure track, which was actually, I found useful and helpful and sort of pulling me away from work. I can also talk about all the sort of stereotypes around being a Black woman and how to manage those stereotypes. So I'm happy to be here.
Great, thank you. So next we should hear from Alexandra.
Hello, Neuromats. Hello, everyone. I'm Alexandra Gelivaki, and I'm very proud to represent in this wonderful panel the next generation of scientists, of neuroscientists. I'm an early stage researcher in the field. I'm a PhD candidate, originally trained as a molecular biologist in Greece. I'm currently doing my PhD in neurosciences, and I'm interested in understanding whatever has to do with interneurons and memory-related processes. I'm doing it trying to combine multidisciplinary approaches, mainly computational modeling with Jota in Jota's lab and in Germany. I am a female young scientist and also a proud underrepresented class of scientists, since I have a severe motor disability. I'm a wheelchair user. So currently, I would like to talk more about my so far journey and the obstacles I've been facing up in order to do what I love, which is to study the brain. And I have to say to all people on similar positions like mine, female scientists, junior scientists, that I haven't solved all my issues so far. It's not an easy road. Science is not an easy road, and I'm very happy to discuss it with all of you, trying to find solutions. So please be active, express yourselves, write us your thoughts and questions related to whatever you feel like you want to share with us. And I hope that we will be able to help you and you will be able to help us. I'm particularly interested to discuss about the road to independence, the success tips for early and junior researchers, for minority classes, for female scientists, and so on and so forth. So welcome and thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much. I should briefly say something. In a way, I can project a similar perspective that Tim can, only that I haven't spent so much time thinking about it so far, much to my shame. I'm third generation academic. I am a white, cis, hetero male. It's kind of like I'm like at the intersection of all things that make life easier in a way, and but that means that I need to learn, and that is why I'm excited that this is happening, and I mean, like the hardest part for me is maybe I have 3 children and I'm very, very involved in spending time with them, and that meant for basically many years that I could never work on weekends because I was with the kids all the time while my wife was working to get tenure, and she's like just a magnificent researcher working on universal basic income. But that means that when it comes to what I can talk about it, I can only talk about family, and that's it, that I can contribute to this discussion.
Don't listen to him, that's not true.
I'm sure you have more to contribute.
To get away with it. No way, Conrad. There's many things to talk about. So anyway, to move on and try to get everyone engaged in this discussion, which is our goal here. We don't want to just be doing all the talk ourselves. Yesterday, we prepared a document on the questions or the issues that we would like to discuss with you today. This is now showing on my screen. I'm hoping that you can all see it. And as we said, the theme of this workshop or this discussion is how to make neuroscience, the culture in neuroscience, better together. So we want to build a more open, inclusive, and welcoming neuroscience community. And how do we do this is a question that we want to discuss with you. So we start with just listing a few of the issues that we think are important and are at least on our mind. What are the things that are preventing us from being a more open, inclusive, and welcoming neuroscience community? So we now invite you all to visit this Google Doc. I think that the link is already posted in the chat, or if not, Conrad will do it right away. And we invite you to write here some of your thoughts as to what are the most important issues that bother you in neuroscience. So not solutions yet, just highlighting what are the most important problems. If you feel that you already have a new category in mind, which is not listed here, feel free to add it. Otherwise, you can list problems below these existing categories. So we take some time for this to be done. I don't know how long, 10 minutes? Until 12:17. That's the instruction. And please look at other people's contributions as well.
Should we have people do like little +1s or add something to other people's, like bump up others' comments if you are also, you know, thinking about that or want to discuss a topic that someone else has written?
Oh, that's a brilliant idea.
Yes.
So yes, please add a plus after any of the titles that are particularly important for you.
And as also listed in the chat, we will not be dealing with question 2 right now. So no answers, just questions, just issues, listing them. Wow, that's nice. A lot of people are already chipping in. That's great. Beautiful. Plus. Just join. What is happening? So we have an online Google Doc where we just write down some of the issues that bother us with respect to the culture in neuroscience. And we have invited all the audience to fill in additional issues or upvote by adding +1, the ones that they already agree with. So go ahead. And we have like 1 more minute for this, or maybe we should give another minute, Conrad. I see people are writing in.
Yeah, I think we should give them another 2 minutes.
Yes, yes.
It's also like, I found it interesting putting this document together. It really gets you to think about how the structure is.
By the way, you can keep typing even after the 2 minutes are over, because people may be coming in or going out, right? And we'll deal with it later when we get to question number 2. But for now, we wanted to set the basis of the most important issues to start discussing about. That's beautiful.
It's really wonderful to see like a document where 10 people are adding great ideas at the same time.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for participating.
It actually looks like a living document.
Oh, and with apologies to anyone who's here from China. We just don't have good open source alternatives to Google Docs at the moment.
All right.
We should also acknowledge off the bat apologies to anybody who may be visually impaired and cannot engage without reasonable access to resources. We did make this as a visual or an only contribution.
That's true.
But maybe we can have some way of sharing, at least talking through some of the categories, right, in our reflection on this later, I guess. So hopefully we can
Yeah.
find ways to share.
Yeah.
So, and I want to say something for the panelists. As you remember, we will next go through so giving everyone the chance to share one thought here, or like one insight, or share a story. And if you see the topics that people talk about in the document, feel free when you talk about it to relate to what's been said about the topic already. Okay, so we will be ending this exercise in about 1 minute. Thanks everyone for participating. It makes it's great to have this be a debate, because if we are to change the field, if we're to change the culture of the field, we need people to be engaged and make this be a topic. And you are by contributing these ideas.
It's looking like there are quite a few topics that are gaining traction with consensus. A lot of +1s on some consistent topics here, which is good to see. It gives us some big points that everybody's agreeing on.
Yeah, I actually wonder if for those that have put a +1 to bigger categories, if there are specific things within that category that you're, really feeling, or if you want to add a little more detail to some of those things. Maybe all of them are of concern.
Oh, wow. It's growing bigger and bigger. Maybe the 2 hours will not be enough.
Okay, great. So why don't we go and get started to hear the stories of the panelists. Jutta, should we start with you?
Sure. This is a recent incident that happened, what was it, maybe a year ago, that really, really puzzled me. I was invited for a talk at a famous university in the US. So I gave my talk, and after the talk finished, I went to the usual rounds of visiting scientists in their offices and discussing about the research. And one of those visits involved a very famous male neuroscientist who was expected to get a Nobel in the next few years. We don't say names, of course. And we had started having a scientific discussion right in the office. And during the discussion, I mentioned something that the other person obviously disagreed about it. And the response was, that's a really silly thing to say. I was like, at the first time, I didn't really pay attention, right? I thought that maybe that was misplaced or something. But then we were walking out of the offices to go to visit the next faculty, continuing the discussion. And then he tapped on my shoulder and said again, that's a really silly thing to say, twice. And it happened a third time during lunch. I mean, okay, that was too much. I never said anything because the person is very famous, right? But it was both humiliating and extremely upsetting. I still think about it and I get really mad, and we had a long discussion in the lab about it. So that was a terrible thing to happen. And I was an invited speaker. That's one piece I wanted to share.
Yeah, that must have been incredibly horrible.
It was.
So why don't we continue with Tim?
Actually, since I'm also a cis white straight male, my voice has been heard a lot. Maybe you have me at the end so we can have some space and time for some of the other voices on the panel.
That's fantastic. Why don't we continue with Eva then?
All right. So I've actually prepared something that's written, because this is the first time that I'm sharing my story. And see, I'm very emotional, so I already start to, get a little teary-eyed. But so I'm going to read this. It might take a little bit, but I think it's important to share. Okay. When deciding what I wanted to do for grad school, I was interested in combining my training in electrical engineering with brain science. Even though my advisor's primary research interests were at the time focused on signal processing and not neuro, and at that time neural networks were not widely used in data analysis, I decided to embark on a theoretical neuroscience project that utilized neural computing elements to perform more complex operations on data. As the brain and perception had always been a major interest, I was excited to be able to combine ideas from mathematics and neuroscience to build new modes of computing. Finally, after a lot of hard work and deep thinking, I submitted an abstract and found out that my work was accepted to COSIGN, a leading computational and theoretical neuroscience conference in the community. I was ecstatic. I presented my poster later that night, or once I arrived, I presented my poster in the main meeting alone. I remember vividly being at many times the only woman in sight. Most of the people I talked to that night were white cis men. This was not unfamiliar to me, however. I was used to being maybe one or two women in many spaces. I had already trained myself to operate in these spaces. It usually meant I needed to talk a lot louder to have my voice heard. However, I had usually operated in spaces where I interacted with men in applied math and signal processing and not neuroscientists. And so I was nervous. It was a new experience and I was there alone. Discussions, not only on my poster, but also at a neighboring poster on a similar topic, sparse coding, were intense and heated. The poster sessions seemed to go on forever. And many times I felt personally attacked when describing my work, and met two grad students later that mocked my topic, saying, "You know, the brain doesn't do compressive sensing," ha 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 ha, laughing at me. I didn't have friends. I wasn't there, and I felt entirely just abandoned. I wanted the whole thing to end. Later on in the meeting, I had many repeated interactions, either personally or in talks with scientists across many ranks, from very junior people to very senior people, where people were aggressive and were trash talking each other's science in public spaces. This was apparently was the accepted standard at the workshop talks as well, as I heard. My main takeaway from being at that meeting was that people were very unkind to one another and were not very accepting of new or different ideas. When I came back for the meeting, I had a crisis. I couldn't imagine being a part of a community where I felt so unsafe. Yet I was really passionate about neuroscience and what I was trying to do. After much thought and other experiences and other spaces, other meetings and seminars, I concluded that neuroscience, or more specifically, maybe computational neuroscience, wasn't for me. My ideas were not valuable and my perspective was not welcome. My dreams of working in neuroscience temporarily abandoned. I finished my PhD in electrical engineering without a single mention of my early work in neuro in my thesis. However, I knew deep down that I wanted to be working on problems related to brain science again. With my confidence somewhat restored after getting a PhD, I started looking for postdoc positions, including possible options to again engage in brain science. I had the privilege of joining Conrad Cording's lab as a postdoc, where I learned how many important problems in neuroscience needed people like me to work on them. How much space there was for my thoughts and my visions and my perspectives. 10 years ago, I was left attacked, ashamed, and feeling unworthy. Now I stand here with the space to tell my story and participate in this discussion of how to make neuroscience a better place. Now I stand here as a professor in computational neuroscience and co-chair of the newly formed committee at COSIGN on diversity and inclusion, right? Poised to make change for our communities at large. I have trauma and I have real pain, as you can see in my tears. Normally when I give talks, I have slides behind me and I have, not so much trauma that I'm sharing with people. I have this trauma and I have pain and it runs through me and it still hurts. It hurts every day. It hurts when I'm in spaces where I still feel like women's or other people that are from marginalized communities where their voices aren't being heard. But I want to use my experience to now be an agent for change. We are making strides as a community. We're here today to honor one another, to build better spaces for people to share. But we still have a lot of work to do. I mean, we saw all the things that were sort of pouring into that doc and what we're all talking about today. And so I'm asking if you can all help me honor different voices and create safe spaces for people to share their science and ideas. And I want to work together with people to hopefully do that. And I'm glad that we're all here discussing it today. And lastly, I'll just say that diverse thought and ideas are critical for growth in science and making change in our world and environment. And we need to be able to talk to one another in productive and meaningful ways to push science forward. Ways that value each other's perspectives rather than diminishing them, ways that use generosity and kindness as a core value, and ways that we can grow together collectively to make this world a better place. And that's what I have to share today. Thanks for hearing it, everyone. And I'm glad that we can continue this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eva.
Thank you, Eva.
Thank you, Eva.
We are here for you. You are not alone.
Indeed. It's just, but yeah, it's just you make such a powerful point for how change is necessary. You know, like it's for everyone who, like you, stands up and fights this despite all the suffering. There's so many people.
I mean, I'm now in the field again. I came back, you know, like I wanted it bad enough to be here now, but I think about all the young people like me that might be pushed away from this field if we're not creating a space where people feel welcome, like they can share their ideas with one another. So
thank you so much. We should hear from Charlene next.
So yeah, that's hard to follow. I think in thinking about like my own experience, I mean, I've been in neuroscience, I guess, since 99 or so, and doing brain imaging since the beginning of brain imaging, right? Since like, I don't know, 96, 97. So I've been around for a long time. And as you can imagine, I've been to some of our conferences, like my first OHBM conference was, I think, the conference in Montreal. And so, and ISMRM in these sort of early days. And as you can imagine, I was the only person who looked like me in the conference. You go to some of the conferences and the hotels and you get mistaken for the help and not as someone who's supposed to be there, even if you have a name badge on, right? So these kinds of things are kind of normal. And so I think, and thinking about like one thing to to highlight is it is a little difficult. And I think one of the things that I do want to say is that the stereotypes around being Black and then being a Black woman are really strong. They're really prevalent. Almost everyone has them. And there's something that we have to fight every day, right? And it takes energy. It takes a lot of energy to control. Like, we can't show emotion. We can't get angry. We can't, I mean, all of these things, you know, we have to deal with. And I had no intentions of actually getting emotional. I think, Eva, you just sort of knocked the domino down. So, I mean, I think, and sometimes I do think that faculty in particular, and that's who I'm going to sort of focus on, say things without realizing the harm that they are causing, and without understanding that the way that they are thinking is based on these negative stereotypes. From conversations that I've been in around the GRE and some of the things that people say, that are incredibly racist and they don't even realize it. So the example that the one incident I did want to share, again, I mean, I was, of course, the only Black tenure track faculty member in my department. So we're sitting in a faculty meeting and we're reviewing candidates, job candidates. And one of the faculty members makes the statement, and I think I'm just before getting tenure, which is also one of these kind of crazy positions to be in, because there's not much you can really say because you're afraid that if you make too much noise, then you won't get tenure. So you're in one of these kind of weird positions. But a faculty member said that we need good minorities. I have no idea what that meant, but I knew how that hit me. I'm sitting in the room, the only minority in the room, and you're saying we need good minorities. I don't really know what that means. I went to one of the senior faculty and was like, okay, what should I do about this? And of course it was like, did that actually happen? Did they say that? And I was like, yes, they said that. I'm like, what should I do? And the advice I was given was to let it go. Don't say anything, let it go. And so then the question becomes, how do you ever change the culture if the people who are being impacted are expected to let the racism stay? And of course, being junior, there's nothing you can really do. If you say something and they get angry, and you don't get tenure, so you're in this like weird position. And that's just the way things work. And again, I mean, sometimes I just sort of, I want to give people the benefit of the doubt because some of these people I know, and you want to think that they're not racist, but these stereotypes are there and they're prevalent, and people make decisions based on these stereotypes that negatively impact underrepresented minorities. So that's my example.
Thank you, Charlene. May I just say that both of you and Eva are extremely brave, because I am a full professor. I have nothing to worry about anymore, right? But you two are really young and starting, and it's really brave of you to come here.
Oh, today. I'm old now. So oh my God. At the time I had to be quiet. Now it's like I'm loud.
Yeah. So why don't we continue with Alexandra?
Oh, you give me something difficult to do right now, Conrad, because really it was not my plan to express everything. I'm not sure I'm able emotionally to share everything, but I'll try to summarize, first of all, something that all people here that will listen to us, first of all, in science, people have to understand that above all, we are human beings. We have ups and downs. There is no perfect scientist. And life has different kind of obstacles for every one of us at different levels. And behind a successful career, irrespectively of the seniority, everyone behind the paper or whatever has an own story and his or her own nightmare to face up in order to continue to do that fantastic work and job, I would say. So, as I said, when I introduced very briefly myself, I have a severe disability, and I'm able to move only my head and a little bit my hands. I'm coming from Greece, and I know that many of you are aware of the difficult situation, financial crisis that my country has been facing up the recent years. So imagine a female woman with a disability in Greece who wishes to obtain a bachelor degree. I obtained my bachelor degree 5 years ago, and who wishes to start a career as a neuroscientist, and also a person that is a perfectionist and has an imposter syndrome, right? Okay, life is not that easy. For me, throughout all of this journey, which is small, I have a lot to do in the future, if I'm able to. For me, science, purely science, was always the easiest part. Truly the easiest part. Because every day, in order to go to the lab and do the job, I had to overcome my own body, in physically speaking, with pain or with whatever else. But I don't have a problem with this because every one of us have something to do. One of the biggest nightmare I'm facing up, and still I have not a solution for it, is how difficult it is currently to do your work as a scientist exactly as you want to do it. If you are on a wheelchair, because governments and states in Europe, in USA, I think it's a global phenomenon, do not support people like me. And with supporting, I don't necessarily mean only the funding on the infrastructure. For example, a major difficulty in my case is the mobility fact, because a successful scientist should be able to move throughout his career, right? In the PhD or in the postdoc level or whatever. Because I consider mobility a great opportunity for young students like me to see the same question being answered by different people with different minds, right? With different views, different culture. We need it in science. But if you are stuck in a chair, you are not able to move and do whatever you want. So this is something that I'm facing up, and it caused me a lot of problems in my PhD. However, people say that I'm doing well despite all of this. I don't know. I'm still insecure despite the fact that I had the privilege to have quite a lot of successful moments and small victories during my journey. I hope I will have also in the future, first God. But it's not easy. And also it's not easy at this stage of my career, because the situation of young scientists currently and globally, it's a kind of insecure situation. All of us, we do feel at some point insecure. I'm not sure about my future. I'm not sure about whether all of this that I'm trying to do and all of this passion that I have for neuroscience I will be able to continue in the future to do my work, right? We don't know. I'm very frustrated. I'm very disappointed by the competitive spirit I see in science, because these do not allow me to be free, to feel free, to have my time and read and try to design experiments and trying to make hypotheses. I mean, I'm feeling that we are losing the magic part of science. And this is very bad for the next generation like me. I have a huge amount of motivation still, despite all the difficulties I'm facing up. But I'm like, okay, but I feel like, what will be the end? I want to contribute to science. Will they let me do it to the point I want to do it or no? And sometimes I have to admit that I feel alone. I feel lonely. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough. People around me do not understand it because I have quite strong personality, as they say. But I do feel alone and insecure sometimes. So the only power currently and honestly that I have right now in my hands is the inspiration I have whenever I read a nice paper of my favorite topic, for example, which is interneurons. Sometimes I'm in a lab and start crying when reading a paper, and then I wake up in the real world, the competitive one, and this competition is destroying science. Honestly, I feel that. And imagine this competition when you are not in a privileged position, either financially, either related to the gender situation, or related to an underrepresented minority class, if you belong in this like me. I don't know what we can do about. There were times that I was ready to give up. There are many times in the last 3 years that I am catching myself saying, you should have changed another job to do. I'm still here. It's not easy. But I think that we have to do something to protect me, you, and the people. Last thing I will say is that yesterday evening, a very good friend of mine texted me and she said, you know, I gave up the PhD. That girl had a brilliant mind, an excellent academic record, excellent. She has all the potential to become a great scientist, but she gave up yesterday because she couldn't understand that competitive and ridiculous spirit. So it's not easy. I haven't solved these issues. And yeah, so that's my message. Nothing is easy, nothing. But we should be persistent, I think.
Great. Alexandra, thanks so much for sharing your view
Beautifully
here.
said.
So
we have Tim and Conrad.
yeah, and it's going to be very different. Tim, why don't you go next?
I think I don't have an experience like we've heard so far. And that's sort of part of the problem. I think as someone who comes from the points of privilege that I have, I don't have the experience of feeling threatened like Eva did. I don't have the experience of feeling invisible like Charlene did. I don't have the feeling of just being disregarded like Alexandra did. And I had the luxury, and I still have the luxury of choosing not to see that. And that's the problem. So it's very easy for everybody in the audience that's like me in the positions of privilege to just look the other way and pretend that you value, an equal society and pretend that you value a just society. while you're looking the other way. And I think the hardest thing to do to change that is to admit that you're sexist, admit that you're racist, admit that you're transphobic, admit that you're an ableist, and you always will be. So I am a sexist, I am a racist, I am transphobic, I am biased towards basically everybody but my group, and that's my programming from the way I was upbringing, the privileges that culture gave me, and I have to work every day of my life to fight that if I want to live towards my values. So the way to do it is to listen to these voices, listen to the experiences of others, and put in the work to change that and fight that constantly. Because it can be very easy for people in our position, like Conrad and I, to say that we value, equality and diversity and inclusiveness, and not do anything about it. But we're the ones who have the power to change this. We are the ones who've been given this privilege to kind of have this power to do changes, and it's on us to carry that effort. We often leave that burden to people in the other groups, right? And that just adds to the barriers that they have to overcome. So we have to, as those of us who are in the privileged group, we have to shut up and listen, and carry that burden. So I don't have a personal story to say. I just more have a soapbox that I need to say to every other person who looks like me in the audience. And that is to listen to what these panelists and everybody else in the audience are going to say, and come up with a plan to put in the effort to do the change, because that's the only way we're going to kind of actually come up with something that matches our values.
Yeah. And I'll do something that is absolutely shocking. I'll shut up and have no story to share. But we do have a couple of questions. So let me just do a preview of what's going to happen in 10 minutes. So at the moment, we are running single track. In 10 minutes, there will also be parallel to us a bunch of smaller meetings. And if anyone in the audience has to join them, like by all means, the magic of science is calling you, and magic matters. But we will be able to continue the discussion. We want to encourage everyone to be with us, to continue being with us. We didn't nearly get through what we wanted to do, and we will easily fill the second hour with issues that we should really talk about. So maybe it would be a good opportunity to take a few of the questions. Not like we only have a few more minutes until the end of the hour. So question 2, we will talk about that in the second hour. Now, like how can we now go forth and like make neuroscience actually better? We will talk about that in the second hour. So I don't know, maybe we should ask people if they want to come on stage. So Jan, Alana, Furusan, Dawn, if you want to come on stage to ask your questions, that would be wonderful. So Alana can come on stage. I should say one thing about Alana. Alana is a student in my lab. She's absolutely wonderful and does very, very cool things about simulating dendrites. And so let me see if we can get her on stage. Thanks so much, Alana, for being able to join us.
Thank you, Conrad. Thank you everyone so much for being here to talk about this topic. I feel like more open conversations need to be had in these forums. For some reason, I can't see my question in the question and answer at the moment, but
I can type it in the chat for you if you want.
Yes, and I wouldn't mind reading it aloud because I wanted to come on stage. And
actually, I cannot copy it, unfortunately.
I just copied it into panelist chat, Alana. You should be able to see it now.
Yeah, as you guys can see, I wrote a lot. I had this question in mind for comment for Charlene in particular. I say, this may be a difficult question or comment to respond to, especially on a public forum, but I feel it important. In the US, a lot of things happening around race that have been consistently happening for as long as I have been alive are punctuated by protests, riots, and looting recently, especially in Philadelphia in the last week. I'm one of the few Black women in my program, and most don't reach out, but when they do, I can't help but feel it rings a bit hollow. Based on your story approaching tenure, you likely find yourself surrounded by colleagues, not necessarily friends, that may have only just recently given you a second thought. In my experience, it is hard to extend trust to my colleagues unless I have known them for a long time. The loneliness that this precipitates is punctuated by people who have never said more than hello to me, are suddenly wishing me well during these hard times. How do you persist during these times in these academic spaces?
Yeah, that is a hard question. And I have no problems answering it publicly. I will say that I do sometimes get in trouble for being too transparent and honest. So, but I do want to clarify sort of one thing. So I'm a full professor now. So that example was when I was pre-tenure. So I did make it through that whole sort of process. It is true. I mean, it's the way I have managed my life is that there's work and then there's my life, right? And so there are people at work, and we're friendly at work, I think I have, over the course of like the almost 50 years that I've been alive, is that I expect people to be people, right? So once you understand how academia works, and a lot of academics are selfish. Most are selfish. You know, they'll collaborate with you if you're going to benefit them. They don't always collaborate with you if it's going to benefit you and not them, right? And so, and because of like who I am, and I just like to support other people, I just expect to get used. I just don't think about it as me being used. And as I've sort of developed and sort of gone through this process, I focus on junior faculty where I'm supporting them and not so much on senior faculty. So that's one thing. But you will have people coming up to you who never said a word to you like right now. And it's about them. It's not about you. It's about them making themselves feel better because they feel some guilt, and they're coming to you to try for you to ease their guilt. It's really not about you. If they've never talked to you before, never thought about you, never cared about you before, and now suddenly they're showing up to you now because of all the protests and because of George Floyd, it's not about you. That's about them trying to get you to make them feel that they're not racist. That's not your job. It really is not your job. And what I tell junior researchers all the time is that, junior researchers of color, is that you didn't create racism. We didn't create racism. We didn't create the stereotypes. We didn't create the situation. It is not our job to make white people not racist. It is not our job to educate them about racism. You will spend your entire career trying to do that, and they still will not change any structures or give up any power. It's just not your job. And it's not your job to make them comfortable and feel better. It's not your job. So you have to have your life outside of work and your friends and your people who support you outside of work. And then you have work. Occasionally you'll meet someone who can cross that line, but you just you can't always do that. At least that's what I have found. Other people have different experiences, but I have found that I have work friends and then I have friends. And you let them sort of say hello and you just kind of move on and just play the game with them. If they really care and want to change, then they'll do that. But you're not their teacher.
Thank you.
Great. So while I negotiate with who we can get on stage of the other people who want to ask questions, I would like to read a question by Bob, and then we can see who could answer that. So Bob asks, what to do when one raises these issues and is met with a "don't rock the boat" message from the higher up? That reminds me very much of Charlene's story early on here. I can't shake that here, especially as an early career research or early career scientist without the necessary power and vulnerability to the higher powers.
So what issues? Any kind of issues?
Yeah, I don't think it matters. I think if
it's
a situation where you're impacted and they tell you don't say anything, just sort of keep your head down and keep working situation.
Yeah, I can say what I would do.
Okay.
I would still speak up, but then I get in trouble and I'm known for that. So I'm not sure if it's the best advice.
But then you're a tenured professor. No, like
no, even when I was younger, Conrad, it's a personality thing, I believe.
Yeah, there are some people who will say it, but what I always caution people to do is to know your audience, right? So, if you're in a situation where people are really kind of emotional and volatile, and one of the things that I have also learned, because I've been in male-dominated spaces like my entire career from undergrad all the way through, men are way more emotional.
Way more?
Way more. You hurt their little ego and then they never let it go.
Okay, but that's not emotional. You mean they get more angry.
They're sensitive. Okay, yeah. I'll say sensitive. They're very sensitive.
Vengeance.
But that's all about sensitivity and emotional. You sort of you've impacted their ego a bit.
Okay.
And so sometimes you just have to read the room and see who's going to be able to take it and how you can say it so that you don't bruise an ego if you're junior. If once you get tenure, you can just bruise their ego and keep it moving. But when you're junior or something, you do have to kind of play. I mean, you have to play chess a bit.
So Bob made a great contribution here where he says he knows another Greek woman, a young scientist that spoke up and did get fired. So
this possible, yes.
Yeah.
I think this is one of those points though, where if you're in, let's say you're a tenured professor and you're white or male or, in a position of privilege and you feel like you are an ally to these groups, that's moments where you speak up. Those are moments when you carry that burden, right? If a junior colleague or a student or a postdoc raises an issue and they get told, be quiet or, don't rock the boat or we'll deal with this later, that's always the one that gets thrown out. It's, oh, that's a good point, but we'll deal with it later. No, that then you have the security to be the pain in the ass. And you have the security to keep pushing the issue. And so if you consider yourself an ally, those are the moments where if you're in that position of power, show it, right? So it's not the burden on the early career researchers and researchers from marginalized groups. No, that's ours. So that would be my point.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think that a lot of times we're afraid to talk about the issues with people because we're afraid, that people will tell us, okay, no, you shouldn't bring that up, or that's not appropriate, or maybe there's some perception of how your story will impact your career. But I think that we need to talk about it with people, right? I mean, you have to have some people that you feel safe, to talk to about these things with. And I think, as Tim was saying, a lot of, if you find allies and people that are in positions of power that can take that message forward and really be able to do something with it, even if you feel kind of disenfranchised or like you don't have power. But it first takes courage and strength to speak up, right? And to say something about it. And maybe that first person that you talk to does tell you, oh, just don't say anything about this. But maybe the next person or the person after that might have a different message or will be willing to sort of be an ally. So it
But I
is
think we just need to be honest that there's some people who are in situations where there are no allies.
That's true.
There are none.
At all. I mean,
How do we
find that,
keep
yeah,
these
I don't know, maybe.
communities?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that in the position that I was in, you can test the waters and you can see, and if they start questioning you, like, is that really what happened? Then they're not your ally, right? So there are some people in situations where there are no real allies who are not gonna, go to bat for you in that way.
And then that's a really tough decision to make, because you may end up, you either speak up and get fired, or you don't speak up and then you live up with it. And
right. And the problem and the issue, at least when we're talking about racial minorities, if you're the only one, like I was the only one, and you get fired because you've spoken up, then there's no one for the students and the other people behind you for you to support. So you're not just impacting you, you're impacting everybody who's coming behind you. So, and these are things we think about. We just think about them.
So
we have also, however, to make it clear that dark things like that are happening not only in science, but I think in many other career-related jobs. And I think that at that difficult cases, something good is happening at the end, meaning that irrespectively of the final outcome, whether we will lose or if we will win this battle, I think that the person and the scientist in our case manages to create a confidence, to be more mature, to handle these things, right? And to gain more confidence. Even if you failure, even if you're afraid at the beginning, you will learn how to play the rules, and at some point you will have the opportunity to do something good. I mean, just to give a positive side on this bad situation, let's say.
great. So I just brought Dawn Taylor on stage. Dawn is working with the Gordon Conference Power Hour and is very much interested in the anecdotes, the stories that are relevant for this discussion. So it's a great opportunity to have her on. Dawn.
Hi there. This is a great discussion. And so back in March, we were supposed to have a Gordon Conference a Gordon Conference on neural electronic interfacing. And I was one of the two co-hosts for the Power Hour, which is a hour-long discussion group for to boost up women and minorities in our field. Unfortunately, coronavirus kind of canceled the conference, but what I had done in preparation for that is set up a website, Inequality Stories in STEM, for people to anonymously submit their anecdotes and experiences. And we've gotten over 140 different anecdotes so far, and your stories are all very well represented in those stories. But I want to bring up a few other kinds of stories that, and I apologize, I came in late to this session, so I may have missed this, but one thing that really caught us off guard when we put out a request for, anonymous anecdotes where, there was no requirement for it to be any specific, topic, just kind of what are the issues you guys are facing. One thing that came up over and over again was inappropriate sexual behavior, sexual assaults, flat out, horrible sexual assaults where people should be arrested for it. Everything from that to, just very more touchy-feely with the female colleagues than the male colleagues, that sort of thing. And that is something that, we don't normally talk about. And one of the underlying factors or comments in all of these anecdotes is way more often than not, the comment is, I never told anybody. And having this anonymous anecdote forum allowed people to come forward and say things that they have been keeping inside for years. And this is something, you know, we all need to be much more aware of. You know, that we saw the Me Too movement in other fields, and that is a big thing going on that doesn't get discussed. And it's a very critical thing, because that'll totally destroy your psyche and make your lab life miserable. On top of that, I guess the other main point to bring out is, you know, we can all be, you know, trying to be an anti-racist and trying to bring people of diversity into our labs, but we need to watch out that not everybody in the lab shares that view. So somebody may be bringing in, you know, people of various religions, races, etc., but they also may have somebody who's very anti, you know, who hates their guts in their lab. And what we've seen is a number of stories of people in the labs, and the PIs are completely oblivious, but they are being bullied by their colleagues and treated like dirt and really undermined because of their race and gender and sexual orientation or religion. I know the Black Lives Matter has really highlighted, you know, the Black experience, but, you know, I think at least in the US, there's also a very strong anti-Muslim and anti-Chinese issues going on as well. So it's kind of nasty out there. And we're still, you know, our goal is to continue to collect anecdotes. We are putting in an abstract for the virtual SFN coming up in January, where we will be kind of basically putting out a summary. We'll be putting in a paper to the Journal of Neural Engineering and writing letters to editors of various major journals, trying to kind of basically summarize our findings and put this information out there. But I think, you know, we can't forget that Me Too affects all fields. And that's something that tends to be not spoken about. And again, I put in the chat the address if anybody wants to put their anonymous anecdotes.
Yeah. And I do want to, because once you mentioned other racial ethnic groups, I do want to sort of just make a note of one thing. So I saw a statistic, I think on Twitter, about neuroscience being like 90+% white. And it kind of shook me because I didn't expect it to be that white. And then I took a step back and thought about the program in neuroscience that I was director of, and thought, wait, because I didn't know, and I you know, I communicated with some of the Asian scientists in the program, because I think I didn't think about it so much because there were so many Asian students and research scientists in the program that I didn't stop to think that they weren't tenure track faculty. And so this is a huge problem within neuroscience for it to be as white as it is. It does, and at least in the US, where we don't have a strong enough representation of Asian scientists or Latinx scientists or African American scientists within the field. It was just a big shock to me because I just hadn't never thought about it.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, should we do a couple of more questions and then move to the important thing, which is a plan for action? But since many people here want to express views, I think it's kind of nice to do a couple more, but then we start thinking of ideas how to solve the problem.
Yeah, so maybe I should read the question by Farousan Farahani, who asked, I have a question for Tim and Conrad. One difficulty for people from marginalized groups is how to voice out our anger for what we experience. It happened to me when I talked about these experiences with white cis men. The talk made me uncomfortable. If it feels like we are experiencing difficulties and at the same time we have to be worried about not hurting the feelings of the privileged group, how can we make them hear us? And I think, Tim, you might be the right person to answer this question, as I think you've thought a lot about this issue.
Yeah, I think this ties back into something we've talked about earlier in this discussion, where it's not actually, that's not on you, unfortunately. You have no real control over how people in privilege are going to react to you bringing up something that might be a difficult topic. It's on them. And it's hard because this puts you in a lose-lose situation where, you know, people in privilege need to become more aware of making space and having difficult conversations. And at the same time, there's an initial resistance, fear, or complete bias against hearing the difficult conversations or having criticism leveled at them. I have personally experienced this, and I have conversations that I've had with people who I regret the way I behaved. And it was my reaction to have to disregard what they said or to find an alternative explanation for why they had that experience that they did, when really I should have just listened and made safe space for it. So the only thing that I would recommend right now is we keep having conversations like this, keeping these conversations in the forefront of our community more and more and more, and we get more people of privilege to listen, does seem to change that. And I have anecdotal experience in our department where, you know, 3 years ago, bringing up DEI issues was seen as trying to actually break down the department itself. There were people I heard make comments about how that's going to completely destroy the department. And that's literally what they said.
What's DEI issues? I'm sure not everyone.
I'm sorry. DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. After a group of us kept pushing to have these conversations more and more in the department, those same colleagues who were resistant 3 years ago are now fairly strong advocates. So I think it's up to, again, us in those positions of power to make that space, but it's also, as a community, if we keep having these discussions, it kind of works its way in and wheedles its way into the minds of the people in power that they need to hear this and that these are issues they need to address. And sometimes it has to be really blunt, and sometimes you're going to hurt people's feelings, and you have to make the evaluation as to whether or not that's a risk you're willing to take in that conversation. But the onus is on us, not you, to kind of make that space.
I mean, like, maybe one addition. I mean, like, one thing you can do, and that you probably already thought about, is to pull in your hopefully not horrible, privileged people where you feel that their heart is at the right place. Now, like, a lot of privileged people are willing to work really hard to make the world better. It's just that they need to know. And so basically it might be hard, but like in many cases, the right path might really be to like just talk with someone who you think will have a good view on things. Now, I want to move on to Katie James's question. And Alexandra, do you want to read the question? Sure.
Yeah. Hi, Katie, first of all, and thank you very much for the question.
Actually, let me briefly read the question to make sure
okay.
everyone's on the same page. So Katie says, question to anyone who feels comfortable asking. I'm very young and hard of hearing. And this is something that, like, I like, just let me add one thing. This is something that we are very worried for both NeoMatch Conference and NeoMatch Academy, how we can kind of like work on the structures that we have to be more welcoming to the hard of hearing community. But that shouldn't be like that's not the question, but I wanted to add that it's something that we need more awareness about. Something I fear in the future as I lose more and more of my hearing is that I will no longer fit into the places that I work, as it will likely require more effort from those that I work with to communicate with me. How should I go about navigating the relationship where it will be ultimately up to my coworkers to put in the effort to communicate with me? In other words, what's the best way to go about asking for the help that I need with realistic expectations? Alexandra.
Okay, thank you, Katie, for the question. First of all, I will have to say that something that a professor in the university had told me many years before, when I was concerned on a similar issue, given my physical restrictions, how I would be able to contact further supervisions in the future and do my work. And he told me, and I'm telling you right now, that the only thing you need to have in science is a brain, a brain that can make hypotheses and design experiments. So you will be a scientist, you can be a scientist. First part. Second part, what I would suggest is, I don't know where is your location right now, but I would say my own strategy is to move to a privileged and powerful country where, as a scientist, you can maybe find and try to apply for something like a work personal assistant, a person that can help translate what your colleagues and your employers say to the sign language, and will be here during your working hours, help you to communicate with your colleagues and your team. It's difficult, but I know, I'm aware, I'm trying for myself, that in some countries, governments provide such kind of things to people. Yeah. So I think that it's not that difficult. It's not that difficult. If you are a competitive employee, if you have a good resume, if you love your job and you get the job, right, based on the excellence and on the record, it is you work to have an assistant, a personal assistant during the working hours, right? And that's the first part. And for example, that issue in, I don't know, gatherings and conferences and so on and so forth, I think that this can be also very easily fixed. For example, especially in online conferences, Conrad, we could, for example, request from the speakers to add captions, right? Under the, I mean, to have the text of the talk. I mean, there are practical and easy ways to deal with these issues. So don't worry, continue your way, continue your job, dream big, and I think that at the end you will find it.
Now, I want to add one thing there. I think technology may also be helpful.
Yeah, it makes miracles. Yeah, exactly.
I've seen people who basically run whichever live stream they get kind of through a real-time captioning service, and are thereby able to get pretty decent ways of interacting with talks. It's hard technologically. That's why it didn't happen for NMC, but that's not a good excuse. But we weren't aware of it early enough. So maybe we should take this question by Mohammed as the last question, and then we have a few more things that we were planning to do. So let's take this as the last question. It's a question by Mohammed Abdelhak, whose name I heard at a couple of things before. Thanks for being so engaged in this space, Mohammed. Who asks how to deal with power harassment that is very prevalent from professors against students and postdocs. It appears to me that other professors are reluctant to stand up in those situations because of power balances, and other students / postdocs are afraid to say anything for fear of retaliation.
Maybe I can answer that because we've had some similar experiences in our institute. I think the best way is to get allies. So go and talk to other people that have the same problem and write up a letter to the relevant committee at your home institute. There must be one about ethics or harassment or something. But as long as there are several people reporting the problem and mentioning names and making it clear that the events happen and can substantiate it, then they can really not turn a blind eye. The problem is when there is just one small complaint coming, for one professor, let's say, and then they can overlook it. But if there are many people that together complain, then it's easier to make a difference. At least that's what I found was a good solution. Anyone else wants to weigh in on that?
I mean, I think that it's sort of very nebulous, like what being a professor and running your lab is, right? I mean, in terms of part of it is we when you get tenure, right, this sort of system is such that there is a lot of flexibility, which is important for doing good science, right? To be able to kind of quickly adapt to new ways or new things that you need to do within your science. But it also means that professors kind of can run unchecked a bit, right? Because no one is, I mean, you have a boss, but it's sort of hard to establish sort of uniform, I don't know, principles of interaction, right, between professors and students. I know that in our department, they've, put a lot of time and effort into having many just different sessions, seminars, and other ways of like training professors how to create really clear expectations for students, creating lab manuals, just essentially providing more clear expectations and boundaries can help to, I don't know, mitigate some of these issues. But I think, yeah, I don't know an answer to this, but I do think that maybe part of it is actually having better systems in place at a department or institute level that can create safer spaces in general and make it sure that, as Yota was saying, like, if you don't know who you need to report that thing to, right, there needs to be very clear communication about how you sort of, I don't know, report things or who do you take these sorts of issues to in general. So
great. So we would like to, in the end, get at like more of a discussion on how we can be better. So as a transition to that part of today's session, we would like to guide all of you back to the Google Docs that I just pasted as well here. Please go to the Google Docs, and everyone should add one sentence to the question 2, which is, what can we do to make things better? And I will be pasting that just in case people come in newly a few times. So a lot of you will still have it open because I can see you there. And so give the best policy that you have, the best change in policy. What can we do to just make it be better?
Can I mention something while people are typing?
Yes.
So from the Google Doc, one of the things that someone mentioned was issues around elitism. And I know that there are likely some people who are, as we refer to in the States, are first generation students. Right, so the first in their family to attend college, and then of course the first to be in a PhD program. And regardless of race or gender, there are issues around feeling unwelcomed or like you don't belong, and imposter syndrome around being a first gen or coming from a lower economic community. So I just wanted to just to sort of mention that, because it was, I think, one of the things that was in the Google Doc that we didn't touch on. Oh, I think we probably touched on everything else through the conversation, but we didn't talk about elitism and coming into a situation where you know absolutely nothing about what to expect, and no one in your family can give you any advice about what to do. You're basically completely on your own financially, because your family can't support you, and you have to, at least in the States, live off a really small stipend, sometimes in a really expensive city, and all of the issues around that. So really, I just want to say, I see it, and I heard it.
I think that's actually something that we don't talk about a lot openly in front of trainees and students and early career researchers, that in a lot of ways, at least in the US, which is the only kind of academic university culture I can talk about, we are still very much a good old boys club. There's lots of great quantitative evidence showing, like, there's a dozen schools that supply, what is it, like 60% of the tenure track faculty at all the other schools in the country, right? And there are even, evidence of biases in the metrics we use for hiring, right? So you're going to have a higher H index or publication record if you have the resources to get out more papers, and if you're at a school with fewer resources, you're not. But that's what we're selecting on. So I think it ties into this more deeper systemic problem that we have to deal with of the kind of historical carryovers of our culture that lead to this kind of bias that is seen as under the kind of umbrella of elitism, which I think it is. And we often just still try to pretend it's a meritocracy, but there's a large degree of privilege in the promotion and advancement and acceleration of our careers, and we have to address that.
Yep.
A lot of ideas in the document already, Conrad.
Should we see if we can group those ideas in some way? Could some people help me edit it in real time and bring together similar ideas?
Let's do that.
Would it be easy for one of us to share it, so we're all kind of looking at least a group of us are looking at the same page, so we can kind of...
Yeah, I can do that.
Comment. Thank you.
Sure.
So maybe we should just add a few bold-faced titles. Maybe I'll collect everything that relates to credit.
Sure. Okay.
Should we have one that's resources?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. I was looking for biases. Power inequalities. This one.
I propose to make something called making a community, but I'm still working on resources. So if someone could collate everything that's related to making a community, I think that would be great.
I think what I'm doing is that, but I called it fighting unconscious biases.
Great. Okay, cool.
Recommendation letters. Police recommendation letters. What an interesting one.
These are some great ideas.
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone who's contributing so far.
This is harassment, actually. This is getting back the magic, putting back the magic in science.
There's a question from Minye Zahn in the chat who asked, could the panelists elaborate how PIs usually use the recommendation letters? Is there a historical description of its use? I don't know of a historical description of its use. I can say from sitting on the other side of search committees, it's often used as a way of evaluating a catch-all of the other things that we can't come up with objectively to determine from their papers or their CV or their teaching evaluations. And so it has kind of, at least in my experience, a very ill-defined use other than just to say, get the opinions of our colleagues that we respect as to the abilities and qualities of this individual. There's large discrepancies across cultures. So in the US, letters are generally very positive overall. And I think a little bit less honest per se because of cultural fears or of I don't know, lawsuits maybe. Whereas from letter writers I've seen from, the UK or Ireland or Australia tend to be a little bit more honest about pros and cons and where their strengths and weaknesses are. And so that, at least in my experience, is something that makes these kind of a not very good measure of the individual per se. I don't know if the other panelists have any thoughts on that.
So what I can say is that I use it to evaluate a lot the personality of the person. If a reference letter is very enthusiastic about this person being a good team player, easy to get along, things like that, this you cannot read from a CV. These are the things that I will be looking for in a recommendation letter. And I don't know if it's good or bad to know about these things. I mean, because it could be bad if you reject someone based on the lack of statements, let's say, about their team spirit in a letter and favor someone else, which this may be just a personal opinion of an interaction with an n equals to 1, right? But if it's positive, it definitely helps. That's what I can say.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, it's a tricky thing because there's definitely a lot of room for subjective evaluation. And so that may or may not be a good thing. It depends on whether that evaluation is good or not. But it's mostly, I agree, it's mostly used to get information about personality and whether the personality fits into the lab or the department more than anything else.
I mean, for faculty, it would definitely be great if we got recommendation letters from their trainees. That's it. Absolutely. But for students applying for a postdoc position or a PhD position, I mean, yeah, I think the recommendation letter is useful. And if someone is not going to write a good letter, they should just say so and not write it, right? I mean, so that's essentially the tricky part, whether you will be supported by someone or bad mouth.
And you should listen to them. It happens to me that someone who maybe, in my view, didn't do well asked me to write a letter, and I'm like, are you sure you want me to do that? Because I really don't know much about what you did in this project. This is the way how someone tells you that you should not insist on getting that letter on them. And if they insist really hard and you insist that they write you a letter nonetheless, you can guess what the letter will say.
Yeah. I see a comment that someone may not have a person to ask for a recommendation letter. I mean, okay, that's not a frequent situation. I think unless you're just an undergrad and you haven't done anything research-wise in the lab to have a personal connection with someone. And in those cases, the recommendation letters don't really matter much because the grades are the ones that determine someone's standing if you're too young, right? You haven't had any research experience yet. So then those letters, even if they had them, they don't really matter that much. Those letters that matter are the ones that come from a supervisor with whom you interacted for 6 months to a year, and you have there is some substance to the letter.
Yeah. Certainly for a lab like mine, they are almost irrelevant. Yeah. The way you get a job in those labs is you tell people what aspect of their research you're excited about, and then they will ask you for a Zoom interview, and there's many different processes of how people do that.
I'm thinking about the question of historically how have they been used, and I kind of wonder if they're a carryover from the days when we couldn't do easy in-person or video interviews and get to know the people. If you were going to hire somebody from across the country and you had they were going to just move there to start the job, well, then the only way you can evaluate them is by asking their peers what they think. Whereas now we live in a world where we can have Zoom interviews and we bring people out to interview for jobs, well, when that was a thing. And so I wonder if they're just kind of carryover from those days when communication was much more limited than it is now.
So there's a comment or something here that says, make it a requirement for professors who will teach or supervise students to pass behavioral tests to assess their ability to deal with human beings. I'm just interested in what the other panelists have to say about this. I mean, I have thought about it, you know, when I started as a junior faculty member, just how not well equipped I was with, you know, dealing with a lot of the mental health issues that students face, or just, you know, just being a good mentor, right? And being a good human, or being able to deal with human beings. But often we aren't given any resources or training. I don't know if others have thoughts on maybe things that they do in their departments or other ways that people can be more equipped to face these sorts of new.
Yeah, I fully agree that we don't get any training actually to be a mentor or to be a supervisor or to run a lab. It's terrible. You get the job and you don't know what to do. And there are these programs, like, for example, EMBO has short courses. They're called lab management courses. I attended them when I was just starting as an assistant professor level. They were quite interesting because they train you in terms of how to do conflict resolution, let's say, and how to listen to people and how to interview people for a job. And I thought that was great. But it should be mandatory, right? I mean, when you get a new position, there should be a training course that you have to attend and pass. And that would solve a lot of problems for everyone involved.
Well, I could answer that question from the students because I'm a student and I am a mentee perspective. And what I would like to say to PIs and to people that are thinking how I can be a good mentor. For me, I think the key word is having empathy. I mean, okay, we know that a good scientist is not necessarily a good teacher and a good mentor, and the opposite, right? But I think that a good mentor has to remember when she or he was a student. I mean, I think that this is important. I mean, this is what I'm looking on a mentor, a person who is willing to help me, not only for his or her own purposes and, you know, just a person that will support students by thinking where he or she was when he was a student. I think that.
No, but Alexandra, that very much depends on the perception of everyone as to what to expect and what actually was delivered. So.
Yeah. That's just a perspective and personal one, yeah. But definitely, I think, yes, I agree that it's different to be a scientist and a mentor. That's another aspect.
Okay, we have a lot of suggestions. Nice, very nice.
We have more suggestions than we can realistically order.
Yeah, which is good. You know, we'll write something about this after the conference.
And of course, we will invite people to join us going forward and like trying to
Absolutely. Okay.
So there are a number of comments here about creating certain virtual spaces or other ways, I guess, to kind of take these steps and move them forward or provide other resources and opportunities for people. I wonder how we provide a way for those that are interested in doing this and starting it to, like, I don't know, perhaps we have a way for them to share their information, or we can sort of, I don't know, just think about what we want to do next.
Yeah, I think we need to build a group of people who are interested in activism in this space. What's the good way of organizing it? We can ask people if they want to share emails on this. We can ask people if they feel worried about it to email their email to Conrad or Jota. Not like if you're worried, if you want to help but want to make sure that the world doesn't know about it, but like otherwise, yeah, we will contact you if you just add your email to the bottom of that. Mm-hmm. But I think the other thing that we would like people to do is to just start being active yourselves. It doesn't require like all of us to do something jointly. Yes, it would send a strong signal and so forth, but it doesn't require all of us to do possible changes. Not like if you organize a conference, there's multiple aspects here, but like how we could be better. If you organize, if you're in charge of hiring, there's ways how we can be better. Like if you have ways of organizing community, there's ways of being better. Let's just produce energy in this space.
Yeah, I agree. I think if we all just took a look at ourselves and our own bias, we all have biases, we all have stereotypes. That's just how our brains work, right? So we create stereotypes and we have preferences and biases that are based on, you know, what we've experienced and seen. But I think it's important for us to be aware of them. We're not going to necessarily get rid of all of them, but the awareness and the conscious decisions about like what you decide to do with them are things that we have complete control over. And if you care about having a more diverse and welcoming environment, then we all each have to take responsibility for that. I don't see any other way around that. We all have to deal with our own biases.
Well, that's step number one, but then there are all the other steps to take from there. And I think that for all the other ones, we can start organizing, you know. I mean, Dan Goodman points out a very important thing here, that in order to solve the problem, we need to make some major changes in the way the system works like now. Change the funding, for example, which makes it so competitive. Change the high visibility of flashy journals. You know, people want to publish in flashy journals. This makes them more competitive, kills the magic, right? And people think that may be impossible, but look at where bioRxiv is right now. Nobody would have expected that it would be such a huge success. People thought that they would not be uploading their papers open to the public before, you know, submitting to a journal. But it's a major success, I think, of the field. And the open access is another major success of the field. And the big publishers are now having a very hard time with that. So change is possible. And I think that we have to make it in big numbers to succeed. So I am all in favor of, you know, writing up something together, many people, as many as interested, and sending it out to the community and try to do step number 2.
I want to also point out a change in the power structure that like a lot of people haven't realized, which to me gives a lot of hope that we'll be able to change things. So the traditional version is that in a way, there is an elite group who controls access to power. You get into that elite group by them accepting you into the elite group. And you basically have to trickle all the way up before you can have any access to the microphone. Not like in a way you have to be part of that group for any number of people to see you. But now with Twitter and preprints and kind of this culture that NMA and NMC embody, and that like you are all part of it, there's a parallel channel. Like there's a channel where it doesn't have to trickle all the way up to the powerful who then maybe or don't do something. So all of a sudden we are actually in a situation where we hold at least a certain amount of power to define how we want neuroscience to work.
I'm not quite sure. I agree completely with that. That power structure is still very much in place. And
But
yeah.
there is another
and
one.
What's the quote? Like, power concedes nothing without a fight. They're not letting go of that power structure.
But there is power coming from the other side. No, like let's look at psychology and the replication crisis. This was like entirely driven by like young and youngish people and their fans like me, and a lot of other people on the committee here who were basically like, yeah, that's the right thing, let's make it happen. That didn't happen by like the leaders of psychology deciding, hey, we should like look into replication failure. So look, they have power, they still have power, they will always have power. but now we have a parallel channel of which where there's at least a certain amount of power, and that's why I believe we can change the world.
I'm sorry.
I think that part of one of the things though that I agree with Charlene, that like we're seeing changes and it's going, I think you see some good changes, but there's still like a long way to go. And I'm enough of a behaviorist to know that you change behavior through changes of incentivization and feedback than changes of some internal belief. And so I think we need to work on locally at your department, in your lab, at your conference, ways of changing the incentive structure to promote the values and the behavior that you want, right? So one of the things that we've been working on and unsuccessfully is really upping the value of service in the promotion and evaluation of people moving forward, because a lot of people interested in changing the culture do a lot of service work, and it detracts from their teaching, it detracts from their publishing. And it's a valuable thing. We all rely on it, but it seems to be in most tenure track evaluation and even, other types of research areas, that's a secondary thing. That's almost a hobby that you do, and they'll be acknowledged, but it's just kind of a pat on the back. But that service load is disproportionately carried by women, by scholars of color, right? Like, so little things like that could go a long way if you just change the incentive structure and the evaluation structure. And we have different places we could do that. So do it.
So I should say we are running up on the hour. We cannot bleed into the 2 hours, into the 2 o'clock slot. So I would like to give the panel the last words here. What were your feelings about this?
Eva?
Very exciting to see all of the feedback from the community throughout the whole event. And, a lot of people identifying really common threads and issues that they're all experiencing. And I think it's important for us to, give this space for those of us, here that shared, and then also for you all to add your thoughts on this Google Doc. I mentioned earlier that I'm, working with or working on diversity and inclusion for Cosign. And so this is also something that, we're thinking a lot about. And I'm excited that we're starting this discussion now. The meeting will happen in some months, but, if those, I do want to find some way for us to all share our information with each other, or just create like a sort of community or some space where we can all know who's wanting to work towards these sorts of issues and what sort of issues you care about. And I don't know the best way to do that, but maybe we can work with Conrad and some of the other organizers of NeuroMatch to somehow get some feedback from you all, and so we can keep on, pushing forward on this. That's what I wanted to end with. Thank you all.
Thank you, Eva.
Thanks everyone here, the other panelists, for sharing. It was really powerful.
Charlie?
So I completely kind of agree. I think the thing to remember is that the neuroscience community is really no better than the larger community. So all of the issues you see in the larger community, you see in this one. Sometimes scientists like to think that they're better, but we're not. We're the same community. So that's, I think, the one thing. And I think if we continue to talk and to push and to work, that we can at least improve the community. And so I think that's the goal, is to make it better for the people who come after us.
Excellent. Unfortunately, we don't have time, right? We have to go in like 3 minutes. Conrad, is that correct?
Yes, we should wrap up. Yeah.
So what's the take-home message? I mean, what do we do from here? I think we should just take it from the Google Doc, and everyone who is interested to sign up or send us their email, and we'll put something together, and it will be more than just a beautiful discussion. That will be my message.
I endorse that.
+1.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for being here. It was so good that we get together about this topic. This won't solve the problems, but hopefully it will help us walk into the right direction. And thanks for all the wonderful panelists, in particular those that were able to share these personal stories. It was really moving. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank
Pleasure. Thank you too.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a nice evening or day.
Conrad, I was wondering, are we able to capture all of the comments and everything?
Yeah, the chat. Can we export the chat
before we leave?
Yes, I saved the chat.
Okay.
It's on my computer now, and I'll be sending it to everyone on the panel. And great.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for organizing, both of you.
It was great. Bye.